The Battle Frontier is a truly beloved Pokémon institution. The games that included it, being Emerald, Platinum, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver, routinely feature in best Pokémon game lists and are lavished with praise pretty much everywhere people have the opportunity to do so. The games that don't include it, but could have, are lamented for that very reason. And honestly, what's not to like? It's a cool post-game facility that includes the more common Battle Tower, but also a bunch of other facilities, including the popular Factory, move tutors, item rewards, and a bunch of other vanity content. It's a great addition to any game that it is in. However, within the Frontier is some content that makes a bit less sense. There are some Pokemon that you can battle here whose sets are frankly redundant. There are tiers of Pokemon that can appear in NPC teams in the Battle Frontier facility. Different groups of Pokemon are used for different battle streak levels, meaning that once you are on a really long battle streak, the strongest Pokemon appear, and when you are just starting out, they are relatively weak. This is all well and good, but the developers went perhaps a bit too far in including some Pokemon in the weak category, to the point where it would have been better to just leave them out. These Pokemon are all in the ungrouped category, which aren't used for facilities like the Factory, but can be for things like the Tower. The specific Pokemon I am talking about are the basic bug types from each region. Caterpie, Weedle, Wurmple, Kakuna, Metapod, Cascoon, and Silcoon have absolutely no business being in the Battle Tower. You might assume that they included them and then gave them good sets for what they are, but you would be wrong. You can quite literally battle Cascoon, Silcoon, Metapod, and Kakuna in the tower, and they have Harden as their only move and Lax Incense as their held item. It doesn't matter that they have full EV investment. Any player that remotely tries is going to be able to beat these Pokemon with ease, unless they also happen to bring a Cascoon to the tower. I guess the funniest way to lose to them would be to use Explosion or Self-Destruct and miss because of the Lax Incense. The Caterpie, Weedle, and Wurmple are mildly better, since they at least have damaging moves, but they're still a huge waste of time, and degrade the seriousness that the game states that the Battle Frontier has. If this place is meant to be the pinnacle of battling, why the heck do they let kids in here with Kakunas? There are a few more Pokemon in the Frontier that have deeply unserious sets, but I kind of find them funny. For example, Feebas and Magikarp are in here too, but they at least have a Focus Band Flail setup with maxed out HP and attack EVs. If you're not careful, they might damage you a little bit, but they're still definitely not winning. The Feebas also has Mirror Coat, which can actually deal some damage in the right circumstances. I also really like the Beldum that you encounter here. Beldum can only ever learn Takedown, so the developers decided to go whole hog and give it a choice band, so that every takedown it meets out is as powerful as it can possibly be. It's objectively a terrible Pokemon in the context of the tower, and it is very unlikely to win, but it's really funny that it's min-maxed in the way that it is, when they could have just given it a Citrus Berry or something. The Cleffa, whose only way to deal direct damage is Metronome, also fits into this category of being terrible but quite funny. The other subset of genuinely bizarre Pokemon are the ones whose sets just do not make any sense. I first got the idea to look into this when I was playing the Factory, looking at possible sets for my opponents, and I noticed that there was a Grimer holding a Pecha Berry. For those who aren't immediately perplexed, Grimer is a poison-type Pokemon. Pecha Berries, when held by Pokemon in battle, can cure poison. Grimer cannot be poisoned as it is a poison-type Pokemon. Why, then, is it holding one? Normally when a Pokemon is holding a pointless or a generally negatively affecting item, such as an Iron Ball, a Black Sludge, or a Flame Orb, it's to exploit it for some other kind of effect in battle. Iron Balls slow the user down, but they're a great fling item, boosting Fling's base power to 130 damage. Flame Orbs are great for Pokemon with the ability Guts or those using Facade, since the status boosts the power of the attacks. Black Sludge heals poison types but damages every other type. there is no reason for a poison-type Pokemon to hold a Pecha Berry. Even if you were using Fling, which was introduced in Generation 4, but for argument's sake, the effect would be to activate the berry, which can never have an effect for a poison-type Pokemon. Using a move like Trick would just give the opponent a beneficial item, especially when the Grimer also has Sludge. Even if it was there to remove an item from the opponent like a Choice Band or Leftovers with Trick, this specific Grimer does not have Trick, making any use case there redundant. This perplexes me greatly, to the point where I think it cannot be intentional. There are so many sets in the Battle Frontier, all with different possible movesets and items. It remains acutely obvious to me that they could have just made a mistake here, and given this Grimer a Pecha Berry purely through error. Which is completely fine, it's a really benign mistake to make, but it's also kind of unlikely. Of all the possible hold items in the entire game, they happen to give this Grimer one of the only items that is literally of no use to it at all. That's just a bit absurd to me. And then I noticed that this Poison Pecha conundrum is not an isolated case. There are more poison types holding Pecha Berries, including a Tentacool and a Roselia. And then I noticed that it was not at all limited to just poison types. Some Growlithe sets are holding a Rawst Berry, an item that heals burns. In a less egregious set of cases, some Pokemon were holding White Herbs, but not with the movesets that contain moves that decrease stats, like Overheat or Psycho Boost. Yes, it could just be a defense against stat lowering generally, but I ask, whose battle strategy heavily relies on being able to lower the stats of a Pidgeotto? Now, I was racking my brains for further explanations, something that would make sense. I thought that maybe they carried across the hold items from what some Pokemon are holding when they are caught. This works for Growlithe, since in Generation 3, it has a 50% chance to be holding a Rawst Berry in the wild. But this theory didn't ring true for other Pokemon. Grimer's wild hold item was a Nugget in Generation 3, and Tentacool's hold item actually makes sense with a Poison Barb instead of a Pecha Berry. Likewise for Roselia. The best I could find was a Rapid Dash, which when traded in-game in Gold and Silver is holding a Burnt Berry, which is to say, completely irrelevant to my theory that they copied game data including hold items for the wild Pokemon into the Frontier teams. Maybe these were just instances of weak Pokemon with bad items appearing in the early rounds of the Frontier challenges, and they would fall away as the player progressed and met tougher Pokemon. While it certainly became less common in groups 2 and 3, it still exists in some places. Magmar appears in Group 3 holding a Rawst Berry. Group 3 Pokemon are only encountered after the player progresses past 28 battle wins, which is meant to be where it starts getting really difficult. There's no way to say that they were purposefully giving these Pokemon hold items that have no effect. I will say that they are predominantly but not exclusively found on weaker Pokemon that are typically unevolved, meaning that the effects of these pointless held items are limited to the early rounds, just by their inclusion in the pool. But still, it is really perplexing how many Pokemon have completely redundant holding items in the Frontier, even up to Group 3. The next set of pointless Pokemon is a little less important, but makes for some awkward moments in the Frontier. In each battle facility, as far as I can tell, the trainers use the same pool of Pokemon, regardless of whether you are playing doubles or singles. This means that in single formats, you can battle Pokemon that are intended to be doubles Pokemon, but instead appear in the singles format. This is particularly acute when those Pokemon are in the early rounds, before the AI starts making good decisions, or, better decisions than random, and uses moves like Helping Hand and Follow Me, which fail to do anything if there is no ally beside them. Helping Hand is on 9 Pokemon as well, though plenty of them are in the ungrouped and Group 1 categories. This isn't really that big a deal, and I can totally see how it would get passed over when putting the final touches on the game. I will say it does undermine the seriousness of battling in the Frontier. The game deliberately sets the place up as this pinnacle of battling, where only the best trainers come to battle with their strongest teams in different formats, but you still end up with Pokemon in single battles reaching for Helping Hand and Follow Me. It's not that big a deal, as I said, but it does kind of take you out of it when you're spending time agonizing over what move to use, and then your opponent chooses one that literally has no effect. The last group I wanted to talk about is how comically oversaturated the Group 3 Pokemon are. Group 3 is meant to be the elite, the S tier of Pokemon that appear in the Frontier, no matter who you are up against. Obviously, the Frontier excludes some Pokemon altogether, so you're not going to see Rayquaza or Mewtwo here, but the list is certainly pretty strong. But for whatever reason, they decided that some Pokemon would be much more prevalent in this group than others. Once you scroll to the bottom of the list, there is an absolute glut of Dragonites and Tyrannitars, with a smaller amount of Snorlaxes, Gengars, and Machamps. And look, I get it. There's only so many Pokemon with the requisite move pools, base stat totals, and abilities to give to the Frontier brains to ensure that they pose a real threat, and beating them for gold symbols feels meaningful. But my word, Game Freak, did we seriously need 10 different Dragonite sets for the teams? Were 10 Tyrannitars and 8 Gengars really necessary? You spent so much time making Dragonite sets that you forgot to exclude the double battle move Pokemon from the single battle trainer pool. I understand that the randomness and the unpredictability of the sets is an intended element of the difficulty for Frontier brains, but most Pokemon here in Group 3 have 4 sets, which honestly seems perfectly fine to me. 4 is enough so that if I'm in the fight, I will not have any indication of what set they're using until at least a couple of turns have passed. They really said, we're running out of time, let's add 6 more Dragonite sets and leave the Pecha Berries on the poison types. Well, they didn't count on me spending my time reading about it 20 years later and mildly criticizing them for it, did they? The Battle Frontier is overall a very excellent addition to the game that vastly improves on the basic Battle Tower of Generation 2 and Ruby and Sapphire. However, they probably could have made some better decisions in my view of what Pokemon appear here and with what movesets. I don't at all think this was a time issue. Clearly they had enough time to develop all of these facilities and also give all of these Pokemon movesets with stat builds and hold items, but still chose to include Metapod, and a series of poison types holding Pecha Berries. For what it's worth, none of these Pokemon exist in the Frontier in Generation 4. There are no Caterpies, Metapods, or Beldums, and certainly none of the poison types are holding Pecha Berries. There's also only 2 groups of Pokemon, and in the better of the 2, Dragonite and Tyranitar both have 4 sets each instead of 10. So the issues were, in fact, ironed out in later games, which is really great to see. That's all I had, folks. Did you ever encounter any of these pointless or terrible Pokemon in the Frontier? Did you ever use them? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a bunch. I've been playing the factory a bunch lately on Twitch, so give me a follow over there if you want to see that. Thanks for watching.